The morning sun shone through the blinds as Tom Thompson sat at his kitchen table, coffee in one hand and a wrinkled letter in the other. He read it for what felt like the 100th time since it had arrived 3 days ago. His younger brother Alex walked in, hair still messy from sleep. "You're still looking at that thing?" Alex asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee before joining Tom at the table. "It doesn't feel real," Tom replied, sliding the letter across the table. "Grandpa Joe left us $15,000 each. I never even knew he had that kind of money." Alex skimmed the letter, though he already knew what it said. He was always saving, living simple. Remember how he'd fix everything instead of buying new stuff? Mom said he'd been putting money aside since before we were born. Tom nodded, a fond smile crossing his face. Their grandfather had passed away 2 months ago at the age of 87. He'd been a quiet man who loved his workshop and told stories about the old days. Neither brother had expected an inheritance. "So," Alex said, setting down the letter, "what are you thinking of doing with it?" Tom shrugged. "Pay off some bills, maybe start a savings account. The responsible thing, you know?" Alex leaned back in his chair, a familiar spark in his eyes that Tom recognized all too well. It was the same look he'd had when he convinced Tom they should build a treehouse when they were kids, or when he suggested they road trip across 3 states to see their favorite band. Or, Alex said, drawing out the word, "we could invest it, double it, maybe even triple it." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You've been watching those get-rich-quick videos again, haven't you?" "No, I'm serious. Jerry at work flips houses on the side. Buys cheap properties, fixes them up, sells them for profit. He said he'd show us the ropes if we wanted." Tom laughed. "With $30,000? In this housing market? We couldn't even buy a decent bathroom in this town." "Not a house," Alex countered, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times before sliding it across the table. "Look at this." Tom picked up the phone and saw an online listing for a property auction. The image showed a weather-beaten storage shed on what looked like the edge of town. The starting bid was only $12,000. A shed? Tom looked up at his brother with disbelief. "You want us to spend Grandpa's money on a falling-apart shed?" "It's not just any shed. It's on a 1/4 acre of land on Pine Road near the lake. That area's growing like crazy since they announced the new park project. The land alone will be worth something in a year or two." Tom scrolled through the listing. The previous owner had died without any family, and the county was auctioning the property to cover back taxes. The shed itself looked like it had seen better days, with peeling paint and at least one broken window visible in the photos. "I don't know, Alex. This looks like a money pit. We could fix it up ourselves. You're good with your hands and I can learn. Grandpa would have liked that, don't you think? Us working together, building something." Tom couldn't deny the appeal of that idea. Their grandfather had taught them both how to use tools, how to make and fix things. Some of his best childhood memories were from Grandpa Joe's workshop, the smell of sawdust in the air. "Let's at least go see it," Alex pressed. "The auction's not for another week." The next day, the brothers drove out to Pine Road. The shed looked even worse in person, about 20 feet by 30 feet, with faded blue paint and a rusted metal roof. Weeds had grown up around it, and the single door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. "Well," Tom said as they got out of the car, "it's definitely a fixer-upper." Alex was already walking the perimeter, excitement evident in his step. "Look at the view, though. And the lake's just down that hill. Once they finish the park, this whole area will be prime real estate." Tom had to admit the location had potential. The shed sat on a small rise with pine trees on one side and a view of the distant lake on the other. It was peaceful out here, away from the noise of their apartment complex. As they approached the door, an older man walking his dog stopped on the road. "You boys interested in old Frank's place?" he called out. "Just looking," Tom replied. The man walked closer, his dog, a friendly-looking golden retriever, wagging its tail. "I'm Bill Henderson. Live about half a mile down the road. Known Frank for 30 years before he passed. I'm Tom, and this is my brother Alex. Did you know him well?" Bill shrugged. "Well as anyone, I suppose. Frank kept to himself mostly. Moved here back in the 80s. Used to work for the government, never said exactly what. Quiet type? What can you tell us about this place?" Alex asked, gesturing to the shed. Frank used it as a workshop and storage. He was always tinkering with something, though he had less energy for it in his later years. Place has been sitting empty for almost 2 years now. "Any major problems with it?" Tom asked, always the practical one. Bill scratched his chin. Roof might need work. Frank mentioned a leak last time I saw him. Other than that, it's solid enough. He built it himself and Frank didn't cut corners. They chatted with Bill a bit longer before he continued on his walk. The brothers then carefully made their way inside the shed through the creaky door. The interior was dusty and cluttered with old workbenches, shelves lined with rusty tools, and boxes of what looked like junk. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams and a musty smell filled the air. A few thin shafts of light streamed through dirty windows and gaps in the roof. This would take a lot of work, Tom said, running his hand along a workbench. Alex was already imagining possibilities. We could clean it up, reinforce the structure, maybe add some windows. Turn it into a proper workshop or even a tiny house. People pay good money for those these days. Over the next few days, the brothers did their homework. They looked up property values in the area, researched renovation costs, and even consulted with Jerry, Alex's house-flipping colleague. The more they learned, the more feasible the idea seemed. The auction's tomorrow, Alex said as they sat in Tom's living room, surrounded by notes and printouts. Are we doing this? Tom looked at the photograph of their grandfather that sat on his bookshelf. The old man was standing in front of his own workshop, tools in hand and a proud smile on his face. Something about this project felt right, like Grandpa Joe was nudging them from beyond. Yeah, Tom said finally. Let's do it. The auction was held in a small room at the county administrative building. The brothers arrived early, nervous energy making them fidget in the uncomfortable plastic chairs. To their surprise, only a handful of other people showed up. Not much interest in old properties like these, explained the auctioneer, a brisk woman with glasses. Most developers want clean lots, not ones they have to clear first. The bidding started at $12,000 as advertised. Tom and Alex had agreed on a maximum of $20,000, leaving them some of their inheritance for renovations. Alex handled the bidding, raising his numbered paddle with confidence each time. There was only one serious competitor, a stern-faced man in a business suit who kept upping their bids. Tom's stomach tightened as the price climbed. $14,000, $16,000, $18,000. At $19,000, the man in the suit hesitated, looked at his phone, then shook his head slightly. When the auctioneer called going once, going twice, Tom held his breath. The hammer came down with a decisive crack. Sold to bidder number 27 for $19,000. Alex turned to Tom with a huge grin and held up his hand for a high five. We did it! The paperwork took another hour, signing forms and paying the deposit. As they walked out of the building with the keys and deed in hand, the reality of what they'd done began to sink in. We own property, Tom said, a mix of disbelief and pride in his voice. Grandpa would be proud, Alex replied. We're not just spending his money, we're investing it, building something with it. They drove straight to their new property, parking in front of the shed that now belonged to them. It looked different somehow now that it was theirs. Not just a rundown building, but a project, a possibility. Where do we even start? Tom wondered aloud as they stood looking at it. We clean, Alex said decisively. Clear everything out, see what we're working with. I bet there's good stuff under all that dust. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their purchase more thoroughly, making lists of supplies they'd need, and sketching rough plans for renovations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the property, they locked up and prepared to leave. Tomorrow we'll bring gloves and trash bags, Tom said, and maybe face masks. It's dusty as all get out in there. Alex nodded, taking one last look at the shed silhouetted against the darkening sky. I've got a good feeling about this place. Tom, I think we're going to find something special here. Neither brother could have guessed just how right he was, or how their lives were about to change forever. The next morning arrived with a clear blue sky and a sense of purpose for the Thompson brothers. They loaded Tom's pickup truck with cleaning supplies, work gloves, dust masks, and a couple of sandwiches packed in a small cooler. The drive to their newly purchased property was filled with excited chatter about renovation plans and potential designs. I'm thinking we could add a small deck out back, Alex said, gesturing with his hands as if drawing in the air. Facing the lake, you know? Perfect spot to watch the sunset. Tom nodded, eyes on the road. First things first, though. We need to clear out all the junk and see what we're working with structurally. When they arrived, the morning sunlight cast a gentler light on the old shed than they had seen the day before. It still looked dilapidated, but somehow more charming in the golden light. The brothers suited up with gloves and masks, then pushed open the creaky door. Let's start by sorting everything, Tom suggested. Trash in one pile, things we might keep or sell in another. They began the tedious process of clearing decades of accumulated items. Old magazines from the 1990s, rusted cans of paint, broken garden tools, and countless other odds and ends emerged from the dusty corners. Despite the dust making them sneeze even through their masks, there was something satisfying about slowly revealing the actual space hidden beneath all the clutter. "Hey, look at this," Alex called out, holding up an old metal box. Inside were vintage fishing lures, some still in their original packaging. These could be worth something to collectors. Tom had found an old turntable record player that appeared complete but untested. "Think this still works?" he wondered aloud, setting it carefully in their maybe pile. By midday, they had cleared almost half the shed. They took a break outside, sitting on the tailgate of the truck with their sandwiches and bottles of water. The spring air felt good after the stuffiness inside. "Frank sure kept a lot of stuff," Tom commented, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But nothing really valuable so far." "Still, it's interesting seeing all these old things," Alex replied. "Like looking through a time capsule of someone's life." After lunch, they returned to their task with renewed energy. Tom focused on clearing a large workbench that ran along one wall, while Alex tackled a corner stacked with old wooden crates. "Some of these boards are warped," Tom called out, examining the workbench. "We'll probably need to replace the whole thing." Alex didn't respond. He was staring at the concrete floor where he'd moved several heavy crates. "Tom," he said finally, his voice unusually serious. "Come look at this." Tom walked over, stepping carefully around piles of sorted items. "What did you find?" Alex pointed to the floor. "See how the concrete looks different here? It's a slightly different color, and there's this thin line running in a rectangle." Tom knelt down for a closer look. Alex was right. There was a faint seam in the floor about 3 feet by 4 feet. The concrete inside the rectangle was a slightly different shade than the surrounding floor. "Could be a patch job," Tom suggested. "Maybe there was a crack they fixed." "Maybe," Alex said, not sounding convinced. He ran his fingers along the seam. "But it's so even, like it was designed this way." Tom's curiosity was piqued now, too. He grabbed a broom and swept the area clean of dust. The rectangular outline became more apparent. "You think it's some kind of trapdoor?" Alex asked, excitement creeping into his voice. "In a storage shed? That would be strange," Tom replied. But he was already looking around for something to pry with. He found an old screwdriver and worked it into the seam. Nothing happened at first. The concrete edges were flush against each other. But when he moved to one corner and applied more pressure, there was a slight give. "I felt something," Tom exclaimed. This corner moved a tiny bit. Alex joined him with a rusty crowbar he'd found. "Let me try with this." He wedged the crowbar into the same spot and leaned his weight onto it. There was a grinding sound, and the corner of the concrete rectangle lifted slightly, revealing darkness beneath. "No way," Tom breathed. "It actually is a trapdoor." Working together, they managed to get the crowbar securely under the edge. Both brothers pulled upward, straining against years of settled concrete and dirt. With a loud scraping noise, the trapdoor lifted about 6 inches before stopping. "It's heavy," Alex grunted, "and something's still holding it." Tom shined his phone's flashlight into the gap. "Looks like there might be hinges on the other side. They're probably rusted shut." After several more attempts, with both brothers pulling and prying from different angles, the trapdoor finally lifted with a loud crack as the old hinges gave way. They carefully leaned it against the wall, revealing a dark opening in the floor. The brothers stared at the black square, their hearts racing. "Should we call someone?" Tom asked hesitantly. "What if it's something dangerous?" Alex was already pointing his phone's flashlight down into the darkness. The beam revealed a narrow set of wooden stairs descending about 8 feet to a dirt floor. "It's just a cellar or something," Alex said, though his voice betrayed his own nervousness. "People used to build root cellars all the time, right? For storing food before refrigerators were common." Tom nodded slowly. "I guess that makes sense. But why hide the entrance like that?" They stood in silence for a moment, both contemplating the same unspoken question. Should they go down there? "I'll go first," Alex volunteered, already moving toward the opening. "Wait," Tom grabbed his arm. "Let me find something better than these phone lights first." After rummaging through their cleaning supplies, Tom found 2 heavy-duty flashlights they'd brought just in case. He tested both, satisfied with the strong beams they produced. "Okay," he said, handing one to Alex. "But we go together, and carefully. Those stairs look old." Alex nodded, and the brothers approached the opening. The first step creaked under their weight but held firm. They descended slowly, testing each step before putting their full weight on it. The air grew cooler and damper as they went down, carrying a musty smell of earth and old wood. When they reached the bottom, they swept their flashlight beams around the space. It was smaller than the shed above, maybe 15 feet square, with dirt walls supported by wooden beams. But what caught their attention immediately were the objects carefully arranged around the room. Wooden crates, similar to those upstairs but in much better condition, were stacked against one wall. Old metal filing cabinets stood in one corner. A small desk and chair sat in another corner, papers still neatly stacked on its surface as if someone had just stepped away momentarily. "This isn't a root cellar," Tom said quietly. "This is some kind of office storage room?" Alex approached the nearest crate. Unlike the ones upstairs, these were sealed shut with metal clasps. A faded label on the side read, "Operation Crossbow, 1944, with a series of numbers and letters underneath. 1944? Alex read aloud. "That's during World War II. Tom was examining the filing cabinets. They were locked, but the metal had corroded around the locks. Frank must have been older than we thought. Or maybe these belonged to whoever owned this place before him. Remember what Bill said? That Frank worked for the government but never said exactly what he did?" Alex was moving from crate to crate, reading labels. Berlin, 1945. Paris documents. Bletchley connection. Tom joined him, shining his light on the labels. "These sound like military operations or intelligence stuff." "Tom," Alex's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "What if Frank was some kind of spy? Or worked in intelligence during the war?" The idea hung in the air between them, seeming both far-fetched and strangely plausible given what they were seeing. Tom approached the desk and carefully picked up one of the papers. It was a typed letter, the paper yellowed with age, dated June 12, 1945. He read a few lines aloud. "Confirm receipt of the documents recovered from the facility near Munich. Their contents are precisely as you described and will be of significant value to our ongoing operations. Your service to this country continues to exceed all expectations." The letter was signed simply WD, with no further identification. "This is real," Tom said, carefully setting the letter down exactly as he'd found it. "These aren't props or reproductions. We've stumbled onto something historic here." Alex sat on one of the crates, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "What do we do now? This stuff could be important, maybe even classified." "I don't think it's still classified after all this time," Tom reasoned. "But you're right. We should talk to someone who knows about this kind of thing. A historian, maybe, or a museum curator." They spent another hour carefully exploring the underground room, not opening any more containers but taking photos of everything with their phones. The more they looked, the more convinced they became that they had discovered something truly significant. The hidden archives of someone who had played a role in World War II intelligence operations as the afternoon sun began to lower, casting longer shadows through the shed windows above. The brothers reluctantly decided it was time to leave. "We should secure this place better before we go," Tom said as they climbed back up the stairs. "I don't feel right leaving all this unprotected now that we know it's here," Alex agreed. They found a heavy tarp and some rope among Frank's things and covered the trapdoor after closing it. They moved several heavy items on top for additional security, then locked the shed door with a new padlock they had brought. Standing outside in the fading daylight, the brothers looked at their ordinary-looking shed with new eyes, now aware of the extraordinary secrets it contained beneath its humble exterior. "When we bought this place," Alex said quietly, "I thought the best we'd find might be some vintage tools or maybe some old coins." Tom nodded, still processing everything they'd discovered. "Instead, we found a piece of hidden history. Grandpa Joe would have loved this mystery." They drove home in contemplative silence, both brothers lost in thought about what they had found and what it might mean, not just for history, but for their own futures as well. Neither brother slept well that night. Tom spent hours researching World War II intelligence operations on his laptop, while Alex called his friend Pete, who taught history at the local community college. "No, I'm not joking," Alex insisted over the phone. "We found what looks like actual World War II documents, hidden under a secret trapdoor." "Sounds like something from a movie," Pete replied, his skepticism clear even through the phone. "But if you're serious, I'd need to see it to tell you anything useful." They agreed to meet Pete at the shed the next morning. Tom was hesitant about bringing someone else in so quickly, but Alex convinced him they needed an expert opinion. "We don't even know what we're looking at," Alex argued over breakfast. "Pete studied this stuff. He'll know if it's significant or just some old guy's hobby collection." When they arrived at the shed, Pete was already waiting in his car, a beat-up station wagon with a university parking sticker. He was younger than most people pictured when thinking of a history professor, mid-30s with glasses and a friendly, curious expression. "So, this is the mystery shed," he said as he got out of his car. "Doesn't look like a secret government facility." "Wait till you see inside," Alex replied. Tom unlocked the padlock and led the way in. They had to move all the items they'd piled on top of the trapdoor, then carefully lifted it open again. Pete's skeptical expression vanished as soon as he saw the hidden staircase. "Okay, this is definitely interesting," he admitted, his voice dropping to an almost reverent tone. The three men descended into the underground room. In the daylight filtering through the open trapdoor above, the space looked even more remarkable than it had the day before. Pete walked slowly around the room, examining labels and occasionally whistling under his breath. "Guys," he said finally, turning to face the brothers, "if these are authentic, and they certainly look it, you found something incredibly valuable. Not just in money terms, but historically speaking. So what exactly are we looking at?" Tom asked. Pete gestured to the crates and cabinets. "Based on these labels and what you've shown me, this appears to be the personal archive of someone who worked in intelligence during World War II. Possibly OSS. That's the Office of Strategic Services. The precursor to the CIA." Alex looked at the desk with new appreciation. "So Frank or whoever owned this before him was a spy." "Intelligence officer would be the proper term," Pete corrected. "And a high-ranking one, judging by some of these operation names. Crossbow, for instance, was the Allied effort to counter German V-weapons. Those were the first long-range missiles ever used in combat." The brothers exchanged glances, the significance of their find beginning to sink in. "What should we do?" Tom asked. "Is this stuff still classified? Are we in trouble for finding it?" Pete shook his head. "Most W2 materials were declassified decades ago, though there are exceptions. But you didn't seek this out or break any laws. You bought a property and discovered what was already there. So we can keep it?" Alex asked. "Legally, probably yes. It came with the property you purchased. But ethically," Pete paused, "this collection could be important for historians and researchers. The right thing might be to make sure it's preserved and accessible to scholars." Tom nodded slowly. "We should at least see exactly what we have first." Over the next several hours, the three men carefully began to document the contents of the underground room. Pete showed them how to handle the aged documents properly, wearing cotton gloves they found in one of the drawers. They started with the filing cabinets. The locks were old and corroded, and with careful pressure they managed to open them without causing damage. Inside were hundreds of folders, each meticulously labeled with dates, locations, and code names. "Look at this," Tom said, carefully opening one folder. Inside were black and white photographs of what appeared to be military installations, along with handwritten notes on the back of each photo. "These are German facilities," Pete explained, examining them. "Reconnaissance photos, probably taken by aircraft or by agents on the ground. Extremely valuable to the Allied war effort." In another drawer, they found personal correspondence, letters between FD, presumably Frank or whoever had collected these materials, and various military officials and foreign contacts. The letters were often vague and used code words, but they painted a picture of a man deeply involved in gathering and analyzing intelligence from occupied Europe. Alex had been working on one of the wooden crates, carefully releasing the metal clasps that held it shut. As the lid lifted, he found himself looking at a collection of leather-bound journals, each dated and labeled with a location: London 1942, Paris 1944, Berlin 1945. "Personal journals," Pete said, his voice hushed with excitement. These could contain first-hand accounts of intelligence operations that might not exist in official records. With Pete's guidance, They opened one journal dated Rome 1943 and began to read. The handwriting was neat and precise. The entries detailed but careful never to mention specific names or locations that might compromise security if the journal fell into enemy hands. June 15, 1943. Tom read aloud. Contact made with P. Information received confirms previous reports about troop movements near the northern facilities. Photographs obtained and will be delivered through usual channels. Situation in the city remains tense but cover remains intact. Local Asset B has requested extraction due to increased surveillance. This is like reading a spy novel. Except it actually happened, Alex said, his voice filled with wonder. They continued exploring, finding more photographs, maps with handwritten notations, and even a small box containing military medals, some American, others from Britain and France. Distinguished Service Cross, Pete identified one medal. That's the second highest military decoration for extreme gallantry in combat. And this one is a British Distinguished Service Order. Whoever collected these items was either highly decorated himself or preserved the medals of others. As the afternoon wore on, they made another discovery that added a personal dimension to the collection. In a small metal box, they found family photographs. A young man in military uniform standing beside a woman in 1940s dress. The same couple with a baby. Later photos showing the child growing up through the 1950s and 60s. This must be Frank, Tom said, holding up one photo that showed an older version of the young soldier, now in his 50s, standing proudly beside a teenage boy, and his family. It humanizes everything, Alex said quietly. Behind all these secret missions and code names was a regular person with a family who loved him. By early evening, they had examined only a fraction of the collection, but they had already found enough to confirm its historical significance. Pete had taken careful notes and photographs to research further. I can't stress enough how important this find could be, he told the brothers as they carefully secured the trapdoor before leaving. Personal accounts from intelligence officers are incredibly rare from this period. Most either never wrote things down for security reasons or destroyed their records after the war. Outside in the fresh air, the three men stood looking at the unassuming shed in the golden light of sunset. It seemed impossible that such an ordinary structure could hide such extraordinary secrets. So what happens now? Tom asked. Pete removed his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. That's up to you guys. It's your property. But I'd be happy to help you catalog everything properly if you want. And I know some people at the university who would be very interested in seeing this collection. We need time to think, Alex said, looking at his brother. Tom nodded in agreement. Of course, Pete replied. Take whatever time you need. But whatever you decide, know that you've stumbled onto something truly special. This isn't just about old papers and photographs. It's about preserving a piece of history that might otherwise have been lost forever. As they drove home that evening, the brothers were quieter than usual, each lost in their own thoughts. The shed they had bought on a whim, hoping to flip for a modest profit, had turned into something neither of them could have anticipated. Do you think Grandpa Joe somehow knew? Alex asked, suddenly breaking the silence. I mean, it's a weird coincidence, right? His money leads us to buy a place that turns out to hide all this historical stuff. And he was always interested in history, always telling us those war stories. Tom smiled slightly. I don't think he knew about the secret room. But he always did say that the best investments are the ones that surprise you. So what do we do? Alex asked the question that had been on both their minds.
Keep it? Sell it?
Donate it? Tom didn't answer immediately. There was a lot to consider. The potential value of the collection, its historical importance, and what felt like a responsibility that had suddenly fallen into their laps. I'm not sure yet, he finally replied. But I know we need to do right by Frank's legacy, whatever that means. As they pulled into Tom's driveway, the weight of their discovery and the decision ahead of them hung in the air. What had started as a simple property investment had turned into something much more meaningful, a connection to the past and perhaps a chance to preserve an important piece of history for the future. Word traveled fast in small towns. Despite their best efforts to keep their discovery quiet, by the end of the week, rumors had spread about the Thompson brothers and their mysterious find. It started with Pete mentioning it to a colleague at the community college who told his wife, who happened to be friends with the local newspaper editor. Tom was at work at the hardware store when his phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Reporter from the County Times just called me. Wants an interview about the historical discovery at our property. What do I tell him? Tom stepped away from the paint counter he'd been manning and called his brother. Tell him no comment for now. We haven't decided what we're doing yet. Too late, Alex replied. I kind of already mentioned the World War II stuff. Didn't give details, but, Alex, Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. We agreed to keep this quiet until we figure things out. I know. He caught me off guard. Said he'd heard we found something significant and just wanted confirmation. Tom sighed. His brother had always been the impulsive one. All right, what's done is done. But no more talking to anyone about this until we make a decision. That evening, the brothers met at Tom's place to discuss their options. They spread out their notes and photos from the underground room across the kitchen table. Pete says the university would be very interested in acquiring the collection for their archives, Alex reported. They couldn't pay much, but they'd preserve everything properly and make it available to researchers. Tom nodded. I got a call today too. Somehow a private collector heard about it, someone who specializes in World War II memorabilia. He didn't name a figure, but hinted that he'd pay very generously for exclusive access. How much is very generous? Alex wondered. Enough to pay off both our student loans from the sound of it. Maybe more. The brothers sat in silence for a moment, contemplating. The money would be life-changing for both of them. Tom had been carrying student debt for years, and Alex had just started making payments on his own loans after finishing his degree last year. There's another option, Tom said finally. We could contact the National Archives or the Smithsonian. Pete thinks they might be interested given the historical significance. Would they pay us? Alex asked. Probably not much. But the collection would be preserved properly, and they might name it after Frank, acknowledge his service. Alex leaned back in his chair. What would Grandpa Joe want us to do, you think? Before Tom could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Pete. You guys might want to check the County Times website, Pete said without preamble. They've already posted a story about your find. Tom quickly pulled up the local news site on his laptop. There it was, the headline. Local brothers uncover secret World War II intelligence archive and purchase shed. Great, Tom muttered, scanning the article. It was light on details, but heavy on speculation, describing their find as potentially one of the most significant private collections of World War II intelligence materials ever discovered in the region. It's going to get busy, Pete warned. Once this hits the wider news cycle, you'll have all kinds of people interested. Museums, collectors, historians, maybe even government agencies depending on what's in those files. After hanging up, Tom showed the article to Alex, who had the grace to look embarrassed. Sorry, he said. I really didn't think he'd publish something that fast. Well, now we definitely need to decide what we're doing, Tom replied. Before our shed becomes a tourist attraction. The next morning proved Pete right. Tom woke to find 3 voicemails on his phone. One from a regional TV news program, another from a different private collector, and a third from someone claiming to be a curator at a military history museum 2 states away. At the hardware store, customers kept bringing up the newspaper article, asking questions he couldn't or wouldn't answer. By lunchtime, he'd had enough and called his boss to request the rest of the day off. He drove straight to the shed, unsurprised to find Alex's car already there. What did surprise him was the other vehicle parked nearby, a sleek black sedan with rental car plates. Inside the shed, he found Alex talking to a well-dressed woman who appeared to be in her 50s. She had a professional manner about her, and Tom immediately tensed, worried about what his brother might have already revealed. Tom, this is Dr. Lawson, Alex introduced them. She's from the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. The woman extended her hand. Catherine Lawson. I apologize for showing up unannounced, but when I read about your discovery, I happened to be at a conference just 2 hours away. I thought it was worth making the drive. Tom shook her hand reluctantly. How did you find this place? Small towns, she said with a slight smile. I asked at the gas station, and the attendant knew exactly who you were and where your property was located. Tom shot Alex an I told you so look. I haven't shown her downstairs, Alex clarified quickly. We were just talking. Dr. Lawson's expression grew more serious. Your brother explained you haven't decided what to do with the collection yet. I understand completely. It's a big responsibility that's fallen into your laps. I'm here to offer the museum's assistance, whatever you decide. What kind of assistance? Tom asked cautiously. At minimum, we can help you properly catalog and preserve these materials. Old documents and photographs can deteriorate quickly if not stored correctly. She paused. And if you're considering options for the collection's future, we would be interested in discussing acquisition. You want to buy it? Tom translated. We have a modest acquisition budget, she acknowledged. Nothing like what a private collector might offer. But what we can provide is a guarantee that the collection stays intact, is properly preserved, and becomes part of the historical record accessible to researchers and the public. Over the next hour, Dr. Lawson explained more about the museum's work and the importance of collections like the one they'd found. She was knowledgeable and passionate, and despite his initial reservations, Tom found himself warming to her. May I ask why this matters so much to you personally? He asked finally. Dr. Lawson's professional demeanor softened slightly. My father was in Army intelligence during the war. He never talked about his work, took those secrets to his grave. Collections like yours help fill in the gaps of what people like my father did. They tell stories that might otherwise be lost. After she left, promising to email them more information, the brothers sat on the tailgate of Tom's truck, both lost in thought. She made some good points, Alex admitted. So does the number in my bank account, Tom countered. And it's not like the private collectors would destroy anything. They're interested because they value this stuff too. But they'd keep it locked away. Only they would see it. Tom kicked at the dirt with his boot heel. We need to think about ourselves too, Alex. This could change our lives. Pay off our debts, maybe even buy real houses instead of renting apartments. Before Alex could respond, another car pulled up. An old station wagon they recognized as Pete's. He wasn't alone. A thin, elderly man emerged slowly from the passenger seat, using a cane to steady himself. This is Raymond Collins. Pete introduced him as they approached. He's 97 years old and served in military intelligence during World War II. When I described some of the operation names and dates from your collection, he asked if he could see it. The old man's eyes were sharp despite his frail appearance. I knew men who worked on Operation Crossbow, he said, his voice surprisingly strong. Good men. Most of them gone now. He looked at the shed with undisguised emotion. May I? The brothers exchanged glances, then Tom nodded. Of course, sir. Just be careful on the stairs. As they helped Raymond down into the hidden room, the old veteran fell silent, his eyes widening as he took in the filing cabinets, the crates, the desk. When they showed him one of the journals, his hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. I knew this handwriting, he said finally, looking up at them with moist eyes. Franklin Daniels. We called him Frank. He was my superior officer in 44 and 45. He shook his head in wonder. I lost track of him after the war. Never knew what became of him. And now here I am, standing in his secret archive. The brothers watched in silent awe as Raymond slowly moved around the room, occasionally touching items gently, as if greeting old friends. In that moment, the collection ceased to be merely valuable artifacts or potential dollar signs. Through Raymond's eyes, they saw it as something far more precious, a living connection to people who had served their country in extraordinary ways. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the shed windows, Tom and Alex helped Raymond back up the stairs. The decision they faced seemed both clearer and more complicated than ever before. That night, after helping Raymond back to Pete's car and promising to stay in touch, the brothers sat in silence on the wooden steps of their shed. The evening air was cool, crickets chirping in the tall grass around them. Above, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. What would you do, Tom finally asked, if money wasn't a factor? If we were rich already and didn't need to think about that part? Alex didn't hesitate. Keep some personal items as mementos, then donate the rest to a museum where people could learn from it. He looked at his brother. You? Tom sighed. Same, I guess. But money is a factor. That's reality. A text message chimed on Tom's phone. It was from the private collector who had contacted him earlier, naming a specific figure for the collection, far more than either brother had imagined. Tom showed the message to Alex, whose eyes widened. That would change everything for us, Alex whispered. No more debt, down payments on houses, maybe even enough left over to help Mom with her medical bills. Tom nodded. The practical side of him saw the logic, the opportunity, yet something felt wrong about it. He thought of Raymond's trembling hands turning the pages of Frank's journal, the living history connecting past to present. "Let's sleep on it," he suggested. "Big decisions shouldn't be made at night." The next morning they met for breakfast at the local diner. Both looked tired, as if sleep had been elusive. They ordered coffee and pancakes, then spread their notes on the table, careful to keep their voices low. "I made a list," Tom said, sliding a paper toward his brother. "Pros and cons of each option." Alex glanced at it, then pulled out his own notes. "Me too." They compared their thoughts, surprisingly similar despite their different personalities. Both recognized the life-changing potential of the money. Both also felt the pull of doing what seemed right for Frank's legacy and for history. "Raymond's visit changed things for me," Alex admitted, seeing his reaction, hearing him talk about Frank as a real person he knew. Tom nodded. "For me too. It's not just old stuff anymore. It's someone's life work, their service. But is that worth giving up financial security?" Alex asked. "I mean, we could really use that money." They were interrupted by the waitress bringing their food. As she set down the plates, she smiled at them. "You boys are those Thompson brothers, right? The ones who found that secret war room?" They exchanged glances. "News travels fast," Tom said with a tight smile. "My grandpa was in World War II, she told them. Never talked much about it. Wish I knew more about what he did over there." She refilled their coffee cups. "Anyway, you two are local celebrities now." After she left, they ate in thoughtful silence. Tom was halfway through his pancakes when he noticed his brother staring out the window, fork suspended in midair. "What?" Tom asked. "I just had a thought," Alex said slowly. "What if we don't have to choose? What if there's another way?" Over the next hour, a plan took shape between them. It wasn't perfect, and it would require compromises, but it felt right in a way that neither of their previous options had. First, they called Dr. Lawson from the museum. Then the private collector. Then Pete, who connected them with a lawyer who specialized in estate matters. By the end of the day, they had the framework of an agreement that all parties found acceptable. 1 week later, they gathered at the shed. The brothers, Dr. Lawson, the private collector, a retired businessman named Howard Grant, Pete, Raymond, and their lawyer. The underground room had been carefully cleaned and organized, with proper archival storage materials provided by the museum. "Let me make sure I understand the arrangement," Howard said, reviewing the document in front of him. "The majority of the collection, the operational files, photographs, and military documents, will go to the National World War II Museum, with full access granted to researchers and historians." Dr. Lawson nodded. "With proper credit given to the Frank Daniels collection and acknowledgement of the Thompson brothers' donation. And I will purchase the personal items, the journals, medals, and family photographs, for the agreed sum," Howard continued, "with the stipulation that these items will be donated to the museum upon my death, keeping the collection ultimately intact." "That's right," Tom confirmed. "And 10% of the collection will remain with us as a personal archive." The agreement was signed by all parties. It wasn't the biggest payday the brothers could have received, but it was substantial enough to make a real difference in their lives. More importantly, it felt like the right balance between their needs and respecting Frank's legacy. As the others began the careful process of packing materials for transport, Raymond pulled the brothers aside. "You've done a good thing," the old veteran told them. Frank would have approved. He was always careful with his secrets, but he preserved them for a reason. He wanted the truth to be known, eventually. "We wish we could have met him," Alex said. Raymond smiled. "In a way you have." Through his work, his words, he glanced around the room. A person lives on in what they leave behind. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and the shed stood empty except for the items the brothers had kept, Tom and Alex sat again on the wooden steps, much as they had a week before. "So what now?" Alex asked. "We still own a shed with a secret room, and we've got some money to invest." Tom looked thoughtfully at the building. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. What if instead of selling this place, we turned it into something else? A small museum of our own, maybe, about local history or something." Alex raised his eyebrows. "Us running a museum? Why not? Pete could help us set it up. We could display the items we kept from Frank's collection, maybe collect other local history stuff." Tom warmed to the idea as he spoke. "This place already has a story. People in town are interested. We could preserve that trapdoor, let visitors see the room. Grandpa Joe would get a kick out of that, Alex said with a smile. His money ending up funding a history museum. A Thompson Brothers project, Tom added. Something we build together like he always encouraged us to do. 6 months later, their vision had become reality. The shed had been renovated, its exterior restored to its 1940s appearance based on old photographs they'd found in Frank's collection. Inside, exhibits told the story of their community during World War II, centered around the items they'd kept from Frank's archive. The highlight of the small museum was, of course, the trapdoor and underground room, now safely reinforced and lit with period-appropriate fixtures. Visitors could descend the same stairs the brothers had first discovered and stand in the space where Frank Daniels had preserved his secrets. On opening day, a small crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Raymond was there in a wheelchair, a place of honor beside him reserved for other local veterans. Pete had helped design educational materials that told Frank's story, alongside the broader history of the war. Dr. Lawson had traveled from New Orleans to give a short speech about the importance of preserving history in communities, large and small. As Tom prepared to cut the ribbon, he caught Alex's eye and smiled. Neither of them had imagined when they'd placed that bid at the auction where their purchase would lead them. What had begun as a simple investment had become something far more meaningful, a connection to the past and a contribution to the future. I think, Tom said later, as they watched visitors exploring their museum, this is what Grandpa Joe meant when he talked about the best investments being the ones that surprise you. Alex nodded. Not measured in dollars, but in stories, in connections. The shed still looked unassuming from the outside, still easy to drive past without a second glance. But now, like the man who had built it decades ago, it had a purpose: to preserve memories, to connect generations, and to remind people that ordinary places sometimes hide extraordinary secrets, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beneath the surface.